Okay, well, I think we still have a few more people come in, but thank you all for being here. I'm Carrie Mayu. I'm Director of Strategic Initiatives at Hutchinson Community Foundation. And I'm glad that you're here to hear from our team at MIT's USA Lab, what they've been working on with us all semester. Keep your ideas coming in the chat for why you've chosen to live in Hutchinson. I'm going to move us into the agenda just so you can preview what we're doing today. I'll give you a little bit of background on how we got here and how we have this partnership with MIT. You will hear the full presentation from our USA Lab team, and then we will have time for a Q&A with them on kind of what are you curious about.
You get me Easter candy, you're so nice. I said, did you get
Lindsay, I'm going to mute you. Okay. And then in our last half hour, if you can say between 4 and 4:30, we will do kind of a community debrief and figure out what did we hear, what might come next for our community, what's our piece of the mess going forward. I do want to encourage you as you're listening through the presentation to go ahead and type your questions in the chat box as they come up, and then we will come back to them when we get to the Q&A. Before we get in, I just want to say this was a team effort. We had our USA Lab team in Cambridge, and then we had a local team and partners who informed this project from how we got to the idea, the concept, the challenge, through to workshopping the presentation that you're going to see today. So thank you to everybody who contributed to this project and everybody who agreed to do an interview. It certainly was a team effort, and I hope that you all share in kind of taking some ownership of where we're at today and where we go forward. Just a brief of how we got here. Community Foundation had the opportunity to apply to be a host organization in late 2020 with MIT on their USA Lab around this bridging the American divides around work, community, and culture. Of course, I think we're all feeling there are lots of divides at work in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our work, in our nation. So there's lots of opportunity there to dig in. We took that opportunity last year to work with a team around the cliff effect and diagnose what community programs and state policies and local policies could be changed to help close the cliff effect locally for our people. And this year, when we had the opportunity to apply again, in doing some outreach to partners to figure out, what was this pain point that we were feeling coming up, what emerged to the surface was around access to housing, but especially alongside the declining enrollment in USD 308 and the further implications that's going to have on the district and our community at large going forward when we think about fewer kids, fewer families in our community. So our question was, what do we do about that? What do we do about this declining enrollment, declining population in our city, and what does that have to do with the quality and availability of affordable housing in our community? So that's the divide that we came into this project with. And our team, we met with them in February and kind of dug down into what do we mean by that challenge and what really are we looking for in terms of getting out of that? What do we want to see at the end of our couple of months together? It's a lot of work to do in 3-ish months. But what we have here is the culmination of that semester-long project of our team looking at our challenge and talking to our people, looking at case studies from around the country and looking at our data really detailed in a detailed way to come up with what we can consider in helping us move forward. I want to introduce our team and tell you they are in the very final days of their semesters, and in two of their cases in their MIT careers before they go off and do big, great things. So we are one of their final, I think, MIT presentations, right, guys? So really grateful that they have given us this extra time out of their schedules to present to the community. We have Rachel Morpeth, and Rachel, her work experience is centered on financial and economic inclusion for underserved communities. And since last summer, she's been working with a California nonprofit on affordable housing and broadband access. We have Jordan Owen, and Jordan's experience has centered around market real estate development in Montreal, Quebec. He's headed back to Canada later this week. In addition to his career in real estate investment and development, he's also a successful entrepreneur. And Taylor Walker has 5 years of corporate experience in the consumer product goods and retail industry with a focus in account management and sales. And since starting MIT, Taylor's focus has shifted towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, and understanding how community, government, and business interact to solve social economic issues. So clearly they bring a whole lot of experience and perspective to our issues, and it's been amazing working alongside them. I am going to go ahead and stop my presentation and hand it over to Jordan to take us from here.
Thank you, Carrie. So Rachel, do you want to kick us off, and I'll be the slide turner?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you. Carrie did a fantastic job kind of giving an overview for the project, and so I don't want to be too redundant here because we've got a lot of other great content to show you. So go ahead and start for the next slide, Jordan. This is the team, and Carrie, thank you so much for giving all of those introductions. I won't dwindle here. We can hop to the next slide then for the agenda. So today we're going to walk you through, give an executive summary and kind of the project background, just to reiterate some of the points that Carrie had just has given you all. We'll cover our approach and our methodology to this question that was posed to us. We'll do a little deep dive into some of the interviews and the key themes that we pulled away from those, the recommendations that came out of our research and interviews, and lastly, Jordan will provide an overview of the spatial analysis that he conducted to give a little bit more insight into how we think the affordable housing situation might be approached. Go ahead, next slide. So the executive summary, as Carrie mentioned, was this question of why are young families not moving to Hutchinson? And we looked at this through the lens of affordable housing to kind of try and figure out how do we balance this aging population that Hutchinson has relative to the rest of the state of Kansas, and balance that with attracting young working families. And so the issues that we wanted to address were like, how do we address this opportunity to create quality and affordable housing? How do we balance this, healthcare industry that does rely on this aging population while still ensuring that there is adequate housing available for more senior citizens? And how do we address existing housing stock that is currently sitting vacant or is in need of being renovated so that young families can just move right into it? The recommendations that we pulled out of this were looking at place marketing, so leveraging marketing to figure out how we define the narrative for Hutchinson to attract people to move there. The second was optimizing the home buying and the development process, so looking at making it easier for folks to buy homes, and also making it easier for developers or renovators to make homes more live-in ready for young families. And finally, strategically developing on vacant and dilapidated properties, which is the spatial analysis that Jordan will touch on later. Next slide, please. And the project background, again, I think Carrie gave a very good overview of this, and we have more content that we want to share. So we can go ahead and jump to the next slide. The objective of our project was to explore these solutions to address the decline in young working families through the lens of affordable housing. Our goal of this project was to identify the successes and the shortcomings of the housing stock, not just in Hutchinson, but all of Reno County. And our desired results were to increase the percentage of the working age population while also transitioning more senior citizens into more appropriate housing for their age and their needs. And our hope is that the indirect results of our recommendations will help to boost the local economy as younger folks move in and are able to spend more money locally, and also to reemphasize this need to improve childcare options, because as folks move here, having that as an option for young families is really important. Go ahead, next slide. And I will kick it over to Jordan to discuss the approach methodology.
So our research centered around two main aspects. There was qualitative interviews, and we interviewed 20 plus community members. Many of them are on this call today, from the City of Hutchinson, Housing Commission, the Department of Public Health. And this really helped drive our quantitative exploratory research component, where we took that knowledge and we dove into research into case studies of similar cities that are experiencing the same issues, looking at census data, county budgets, and then finally we look at an in-depth spatial analysis. So we utilize a lot of the data that Carrie helped us compile with DJ Gehring from the city, and we identify where should we be building senior housing development and downtown revitalization. We'll go into that shortly. And then our hypothesis is that we want to define a narrative for Hutchinson so that there's high quality housing and affordable housing in the city, so that people can actually find places to live nearby. That was one of the results of many of our interviews, and we'll actually get into that shortly with Taylor.
Great, thank you so much. So in this section, I'll be reviewing our interview results. And over the past few months, just starting off, as was mentioned, we conducted over 20 interviews with folks across various organizations ranging from the city to the county level. Also entrepreneurs and people both in state and out of state. And from that, you can go to the next slide. We would start with really a consistent set of questions, really to understand a person's journey to and within Hutchinson, and furthermore, really hearing their specific experience with how Hutchinson has changed over time. And then moving to the next slide, you'll see a summary of the results. And really, this is just to kind of highlight our key takeaways. So on the left side, you'll see a word cloud that really speaks to the common words that were most used within our interviews. And to the right is a bit of commentary to really synthesize and bring some additional clarity and context to some of these individual words. So from a strengths perspective, many of the interviews that we conducted, folks spoke to a sense of community and the ability to really make a change through involvement. In addition, the community really recognized the joint efforts made across both public, private, and nonprofit sectors. And lastly, I think there was an overarching agreement around the city attractions being relatively unique to a city of the size of Hutchinson. And so really seeing a strong sense of this is a great place to live. We have these, X, Y, and Z here for our community. As far as opportunities are concerned, there was a conversation around affordability with housing and childcare, community awareness of resources and events that are hosted by the city, and also an opportunity to really develop in neighborhoods in South Hutchinson, and the need for quality wages and jobs. And I'm sure, as everyone has experienced who has worked with anything in the city, and as the three of us will definitely attest to, many issues that affect a city are often multifaceted and really never one-dimensional. However, we really wanted to continue through the lens of housing to really address this specific problem. And so next, we will highlight the quotes that really sparked our thoughts around our recommendations. And we did try to kind of bucket these into larger themes. So the first theme that we'll discuss is around marketing. And so I'll just give you a few moments just to read the quote, and then I will kind of highlight some of our key takeaways from it. So ultimately, the first quote is really challenging us to define the narrative of Hutchinson. It really speaks to, there's some negative sentiments that are within the community around things that actually affect, our nation. And however, we're seeing that Hutchinson is somewhat carrying those labels a little bit more so. And so this prompted us to think about, how do we want to rebrand ourselves? What is a story we want to share? Or how do we want people to discuss Hutchinson when they're in our community and also outside of our community? The second quote is really recognizing the opportunity we have based on our proximity to larger cities. And how can we leverage that to our benefit? So Kansas City being, I think it was like around 2.5 hours to 2 hours away. And then Wichita being, I say 45 to an hour, just depending on how fast people drive, just because you never know. But the idea that they're relatively close, and thinking about, again, how can we leverage our proximity as a part of our value proposition. Moving to the next slide. So I'll give you a few minutes to read this as well. And this theme is really around housing resources. So the first quote really speaks to someone's experience trying to move to Hutch and basically becoming a renter. And at the time, how it was really hard for them to find a place to rent, and also considering being a home buyer, and how that also somewhat felt like a little bit of a struggle as well. And within this interview specifically, we actually pulled up Zillow just to kind of do the quick, let's just double check. We looked for places to rent within Hutchinson, and we found 2 options currently on that particular day. And then looking at housing, I think there was 70 or 60 plus properties that could potentially be purchased. And so they even spoke to their experience with one of the loan officers, and not necessarily in that moment feeling like they were told about all the resources that were available when it comes to down payment assistance, et cetera. And so realizing that there could be an opportunity as far as really making home ownership feel accessible to the people that are in the community. The second quote really brings attention to the broader thoughts around a housing plan. I think, when we have talked to people, we have typically talked a little bit about affordable housing, but also wanting to make sure that it's comprehensive and taking into consideration medium incomes as well, and making sure that we're really supplying the needs of the larger community. So really thinking about those considerations as we thought about our recommendations. And then lastly, this particular theme is around development. And so I'll give you a few moments to read these 3 quotes as well. So this slide really shows, I think, the varied opinions on where to develop next, and the need for redevelopment as we look at prioritizing the downtown, but also concerns in developing in South Hutchinson or Southern Hutchinson, and also how developing is an important piece of really driving the economy. So again, from our conversations, varied responses in how to develop or where to develop, but I think it was a clear sign that we need to align on what the strategy would be as far as development is going forward. So at this time, I will move into recommendations. And with those quotes in mind, we really anchored ourselves again back to the problem statement of being tasked with how we can attract young people and young families to Hutchinson through a lens of housing. And so with that in mind, we're putting forth 3 recommendations. So 1, leveraging marketing to really define our city narrative. 2, optimizing the home buying and development process. And 3, strategically developing on vacant and dilapidated properties. So moving into recommendation 1. So Hutchinson should define and share our narrative. So from speaking with people in the community, and even looking on neighborhood reviews and websites online, again, very different narratives floating around regarding Hutchinson. And in some cases, there are some people, I think, that even gave us, line of sight to having no opinion. There's cities within Kansas per se that don't necessarily think about Hutchinson at all. And I honestly think that's a great place to be, where it's a chance for us to really anchor ourselves, think about how we want to be defined, how we want to be known, how we want to communicate. Again, I mentioned a unique value proposition, what makes Hutchinson different than other cities. And you can see some of the brands and just logos to the right here, just to kind of get you thinking again, what our city has to offer and how we can really portray that and be the voice of our message versus allowing a lot of narratives to really float around. And so once we really think about defining our narrative and our brand, and really creating Hutchinson to be a place not to just visit, but a place to live, how do we want to communicate that strategy out? And so thinking about that in 3 different ways. And so in one regard, it would be remote workers, right? And that could be something that is a national campaign, or I know there is kind of people migration data out there to say who tends to move to the central areas of the states, and being a little bit more targeted on some of the coastal cities. There's also a potential angle around commuters. So thinking about Wichita, Kansas, and how we can try to bring some folks in who are willing to make that commute, and what incentives could we provide, whether it was around gas cards or tax breaks or what have you, but just thinking about how we can really tap into all those colleges that are within Wichita, and moving some of those younger people to Hutchinson. And then thirdly, thinking about a citywide campaign. And that's really, again, to really garner, I would say, community pride around the narrative, to allow people to discuss Hutchinson in a productive way, to make sure that, of all the things that are being offered, I think I saw everything from a chocolate festival to like a mystery murder dinner or Stratica. Like, how do we make sure that there's a one-stop shop as far as like people who live in Hutchinson being able to know what their city is offering them, and being able to attend, and just really being, I would say, plugged in. And so moving to the next slide, this is just to kind of support this idea around leveraging marketing. These are a few campaigns. I really kept it to the central area and trying to think about our neighbors. And so I really just want this slide to communicate that, although right now we're not, maybe where Hutchinson isn't necessarily investing a ton into marketing, our neighbors are. And in some cases specifically, I would say Tulsa Remote is probably one of the better case studies where it's really showing returns. I would just say this, that, Hutchinson by no means will be the first person or first city per se to do marketing, but I would just really hope that we're not the last, because there is a ton of conversation around it, especially as you come out of the pandemic and you start to think about how remote work is looking differently. People care, and their values have been, I think, reassessed and tested. So just really wanting to take the time to, again, define the narrative of Hutchinson, and then think about how we want to portray that to the larger communities. And so with that, I will go ahead and hand it off to Rachel for our next recommendation.
Thanks, Taylor. Our second set of recommendations is about optimizing the home buying process. And when I get to the next slide, I'll also talk about the development process. So during our interviews with both renters and homeowners, or those looking to buy homes, we found that information on how to purchase a home and financial assistance that was available for that process was either rather opaque or disaggregated across a number of different platforms and difficult to navigate. And so one of the recommendations that came out of this was to consolidate these platforms, combining education about how the home buying process works and awareness of the different types of financial resources that are available to help people, into a single platform. And this is something that has been done in other counties and states around the nation, where all the user sees is a single application that has the different financial resources that can be applied to, and then that application gets disseminated to all of the corresponding organizations. And so this is a much more user-friendly way for folks to be able to purchase a home or obtain rental assistance, or even smaller payments like utility assistance. And if a place like Hutch or Reno County doesn't have the internal resources to develop something like this, there are nonprofit organizations like Code for America that are really fantastic and can work on short-term projects to help develop these types of resources. Next slide, please. And then on the other side of this was the development process. And I will note that I have renovation on this slide, but home buyers or renters can also be home renovators. And so that was another piece of the equation that we were looking at. And so there are a number of federal home assistance programs, but there are also a number available at the state level, as well as resources that are either consistent or ad hoc that we learned about in Hutch. For example, when the pandemic hit, we learned about this fantastic program that the Community Foundation had to help folks with a pool of funds available for utility and rental assistance. So again, there are these amazing resources that are available to help folks with renovations or development, again, that are just aggregated across a number of platforms. The state that has a really great example of this is Pennsylvania, where they had 4 or so different agencies that each had different housing resources available for developers. And instead of having developers have to go to each of these agencies and submit an application for funds, they made a single application through the State Housing Commission that again gets disseminated to all 4 agencies. So again, it's just making sure that it's user-friendly and not something that's going to be a heavy lift where they have to go to all these different funding sources and have kind of that red tape get wrapped up in the process and make it take longer than it needs to. And next slide, please. And one of the things that came up at the end of our project was this concern about displacing marginalized communities with development. And so we spent the last couple of weeks of this project exploring different case studies around the country for how towns that are comparable in size or location to Hutchinson and Reno County have addressed this issue. And the key takeaway that we found from this research was that it's not about being anti-development, because quality development is really critical to a town. The priority should be to put fighting displacement at the front of the development efforts. And there are a number of different ways that this can be done. One of the main ways is just making sure that those who are at risk of being displaced are invited to the table at the very beginning of these development conversations so that their concerns and their voices are being heard and taken into account in the development process. The second component is to make sure that building is happening before buildings are being demolished, so that folks who may be displaced have a place that they can go before their building is demolished and replaced with something that's more modern. Another option is to give residents in places that are going to be renovated or developed the right of first refusal when the new buildings are seeking tenants for new or refurbished housing. And then in terms of property values, this was another thing that came up as a concern where, if folks see rising property values, they might not have the income to pay off the property taxes that come along with that. And we had explored some tax incentives there, but we didn't want to have any negative ramifications to the school where they have a loss of income through property taxes. And so one of the solutions that we came across were these community land trusts. And there's a number of examples of these around the country. And we do have a slide in the appendix that gives specific examples if you'd like to dive into them further. Probably the closest example geographically to Hutch is on the Missouri side of Kansas City, where there's a community land trust. And the way that these work is community members go in to buy a plot of land, and this helps to keep property values stable over a longer period of time so that you don't see those rapidly rising property values and have that impact through property taxes. And the final recommendation on how to avoid displacement is encouraging local elected officials to levy a vacancy tax on investors and speculators so that you don't end up with all of these properties just sitting vacant as investors wait for somebody to move in so that they can charge a higher rent. And if these taxes are earmarked for affordable housing, that can help to push your goals even further. And I believe that's next slide, please. Next recommendation. Yeah, so I'm going to pop it over to Jordan to go over his spatial analysis.
Thank you, Rachel. So in this section, we're going to be analyzing the last recommendation, which is identifying opportunities through spatial analysis. So to begin, we thought of two separate investment theses for redevelopment, for revitalization, and these came about in our interviews, in our discussions with Carrie. So the first thing that we're looking into is downtown revitalization, and the second is senior housing development. For senior housing development, we saw that there was a strong need for senior housing, and the current senior housing facilities are at capacity, and there is a need for it. And having these facilities operating would open up some housing stock for redevelopment or for renovation for more younger families to inhabit. And for downtown revitalization, this is always a great goal to work towards, whether it's increasing the commercial activation in a city or increasing the amount of good quality housing around the downtown. It always leads to a benefit to the city, and it becomes more attractive as a result. So before we get into some technicals, I wanted to give a very high level overview of spatial analysis 101. The way spatial analysis works, there's many methods. One of the main methods that we use is called layering. And that's where you take the real world here, and then you layer on data on top of that, and then you put it back to the real world, and you identify certain characteristics to make you understand the world or spaces in a more quantitative way. So think of it as mixing colors, for example. Each color you could imagine as a layer of data. One layer of data could be median income. So let's say a specific area has a low median income, another area has a high median income. You want to identify areas with high median income. That could be one layer. And let's say the other layer is individuals above 85 years old. So you want to find both areas where there's individuals above 85 and where there are high median household values. And you could see spatially that would be located in the middle. It's the same thing in the real world, except you're layering it on Hutchinson. So to begin, we had to collect a series of data sets. The first major data set that we had to collect was from the Census Bureau. And this was provided with the help of Carrie and DJ Gehring from the city. And this provided us a lot of information. For example, age distribution data that was critical for our research, household income, median household income, and lastly, spatial delineation. What this means is it means how could we compare data spatially. So all these squares are called blocks, and each block has a different age distribution data value or household income data value associated with it. And this block is how we're going to be using how we're going to be comparing spaces. The next very important data set was a parcel data set. It's less known because it's less public. It's less publicly known by even the government and individuals in this field. It was a data set that we came across that provided a tremendous amount of value. This is an example. This is the Beacons platform you could see here. And there was 22,000 parcels. A parcel is a plot of land that is owned by an individual or a company. And each parcel is either a residential single family home, a townhouse, a commercial building, industrial. And this data set provided reports on each parcel. So here we had really important information on the housing or the commercial value, the lot size, the owner, all this stuff that became really critical for our research moving forward. So to understand where we should be building senior housing, we had to create an index, which we explained before. It's layering the data. So imagine those colors. The base layer that we use as a base that is used to compare the data are those census blocks that we showed before. It's all these little shapes here. And we use a standardization method called binning. It's a technical term. There's also a report that came with this presentation to explain all the technical terms. If you're curious, we sent it to Carrie, and I'm sure she would be happy to share it. There are two map layers that we used. The first of all was percentage of population above 85. We're looking for areas that there's a large percentage of the population above 85 because we want to build for senior housing. And if you want to build senior housing developments, individuals won't likely want to move far to a senior housing facility. So that's why that makes sense. And the next is household value. Real estate development typically requires a specific household value in order to be financially feasible. So finding areas with the highest value is warranted as well. When you mix those two layers together, you get a map that looks like this. It's a color-coded map. The darker the color, the higher the potential. The lighter the color, the lower the potential. So this basically shows that senior housing development projects in the north part of the city would be most ideal. What about downtown revitalization? It's the same base layer, census blocks, same standardization method. However, we use different map layers. So to revitalize the downtown core, we want to have a layer that indicates how far you are from the city, from the downtown area. median household value for the same reasons as before. And similarly, or opposite from senior housing development, we're looking at areas where there's a lot of people below the age of 35. And that's because we're building for young families. When you put those three layers together, you get a similar map: dark red, high potential, light red, lowest potential. So you could see that you want to build areas in the downtown core. So what am I saying that is of added value here? It's, most of you already know this, and it's pretty much common sense. If you want to revitalize the downtown, you revitalize the downtown. And if you want to build senior housing, that it required a bit more spatial analysis, but you build where there's a need. So what could we do with this information that would add even more value? How could we actually use this to revitalize Hutchinson? We could identify opportunities that fall within these high potential zones. So what is an opportunity in real estate development? It's either a vacant plot of land or a dilapidated building, residential or commercial. So let's start off with vacant plots of land, because this one was relatively easy to identify. With that parcel data set, we were provided a building value and a land value. So separate building value and land value. When the building value was 0, it means there was no building on the land. So it was a vacant plot of land. So we just basically looked at all those vacant plots of land and we classified them either above 10,000 feet or below 10,000 feet. And the reason 10,000 square feet is because real estate development requires some sort of scale for it to be feasible. Plots that are too small, people and developers, even contractors, won't be interested. And ideally, you look for projects or size vacant plots of land that are larger in high potential areas. So this data set is in Excel form. Carrie, we're going to be sending it to her with all the square feet associated with the downtown revitalization score and the senior housing development score. So this could be used to start developing and start identifying plots of land quantitatively where they should be developing and for what reason. So what about dilapidated real estate? This one was fascinating in my opinion. How could we do this quantitatively? And it was quite a puzzle for us, and we were discussing as a team, and it really came as an aha moment for us. And we found that the way you could identify dilapidated real estate is by looking at each individual block. So this is just an aerial view of a random street block. And what we're doing is we're basically comparing the housing values of all the neighbors. We're computing an average for the block, and we're looking at how different is this house to the average on the block. Real estate is really locational, so you can't compare one block to another. That's why we use the block level here. And then what we do is we take that difference of each individual home to the median on the block, and we place it on a normal distribution. And what that means is we're just standardizing it so that we could compare it across the city. And what we're doing is we're doing outlier detection. So we want to find what are the outliers on a block. Are there positive outliers? Are there negative outliers? And the way you see that is through the Z-score that you compute. And houses that have a very negative Z-score are going to be negative outliers. Houses that have a very positive Z-score are going to be positive outliers. So that's high level what we're doing here. What are the results? And this is a map of how of all the residential parcels in Hutchinson, along with their corresponding Z-score. So there, out of the 22,000 parcels in Hutchinson, there's 14,000 that were residentially zoned, so single family homes. And this is a color map of the level of dilapidation. So -4 to -2 is the Z-score, and that we consider most dilapidated. -2 to -1.5 moderately, and then the rest are average, and this 1.5 to 4.5 are the highest value. So we could see that there are a significant amount of dilapidated homes. In reality, there's 158 red dots, and there's about 460 orange dots. So this is really interesting theoretically, but did it actually work in practice? Did it? The result is pretty fascinating because it did work. These two houses are neighbors. So you could see that this one we consider dilapidated. It had a Z-score of -2.3. And if you go to the previous slide, -4 to -2, we consider that most dilapidated. So this one, -2.3, this one had a 1.29. It had a relatively high value. You can see the municipal value here is 71,000. Here it's 7,000. So what do we do with this? What do we do about this list? The Hutchinson Foundation may decide to partner with local developers and revitalize the most dilapidated homes. So there's 158 homes that we're going to be providing, and they're going to have their associated downtown revitalization score and senior housing development score. The community could build these homes one at a time or build on new lots, and developing these opportunities may take years. It's therefore a long-term goal to work towards. So now I'm going to pass it on for the next steps.
So as we consider these 3 recommendations, we also wanted to incorporate some initial next steps we believe will really help to direct these initiatives. And for the purpose of this presentation, we'll only cover the first bullet of each note, of each recommendation, but just wanted to note that there are additional details in the appendix. So starting with the marketing initiative, first and foremost, we really recommend finding a marketing group to partner with for city branding. This can really help to kind of sort through all the amenities, all the offerings, and really create a cohesive story for the city of Hutchinson. Secondly, in regards to optimizing the home buying and developmental process, we really need to identify the different funding opportunities available to both developers, renovators, home buyers. And by doing this, we can really recognize what information is out there and what do we need to really organize, or how we need to organize it, and really the method of making it more accessible. In regards to strategically developing on the vacant or dilapidated parcels of land, really recommend connecting with a city planner or a real estate developer to strategize on, Jordan has provided this list of parcels, and like what can we do with those? How can we act on those? But also in a very strategic way. So thinking about, 5 to 10, but 10 to 15. Also thinking, long term, I would say, as far as the strategy for the city and how we really want to develop within Hutchinson. And so at this time, those are just initial next steps. Moving into thank yous, and you can feel free to click, thank you to our partners, just really echoing Carrie's sentiments earlier, everyone that we spoke with, thank you so much for your time. I know I saw some familiar names, some familiar faces, and we just really appreciate it. It definitely gave us insight into community. So thank you for sharing that with us and just your experience. I know we've kind of spoke about this in our last presentation with our larger group, but we definitely think that this project has had an impact on our lives in various ways. And so we are very excited to work with you, very excited to learn more about your homes and your city, and hopefully you're able to find this useful and impactful and just help to continue to grow Hutchinson through this partnership. So thank you again.
We could open up to questions now. Kara, if you have any questions, or anyone in the audience.
Yeah, go ahead, guys. I'm gonna remove the spotlight so we can see everybody again. Okay. All right, community, what questions do you have? I guess, Jordan, do you want to stop your screen share?
Sure, unless someone wants to reference the slide.
And also, I'm sure that was a lot to digest. So
yeah,
we need a second to just bring it all together.
I'd love it if you put the slide back on the 3 recommendations so I could see those while we talk.
Is this the one you wanted, Aubrey, or did you want the one at the end with the bullets underneath?
I was trying to think, I think there's one that's more fleshed out that would be helpful too. It was more toward the end.
Yeah, I think Jordan may be the one that has the blue blocks at the very end.
Yeah, where Taylor just read the top one, top bullet on each.
So Jordan, thank you so much for
There it is. That's-
facilitating that for us.
Thank you.
And Taylor, I don't know if you just saw someone put a marketing focused question in the chat.
I did. Okay, so what suggestions do you have for using existing marketing efforts throughout our community partners and uniting our message? So I think my initial thoughts on, so if you're, okay, so let me just make sure I'm understanding existing marketing efforts through our community partners and uniting our message. So I think there is some like initial work as far as branding is concerned, but I think it's almost like, who are the key voices in the community? I think if we go, Jordan, actually, I hate to skip, but can you go down 2 more slides, actually? So as far as leveraging marketing, this was kind of the initial, like the deeper steps that I was kind of quoting out. Leveraging your current assets, I think, is kind of identifying, honestly, who are those key avenues as far as, you know, where people are getting their information from, who are some of the larger brands, and or I would say brands, but in my mind, I'm thinking like partners. Like I think when I think about what is the local newspaper called? It is called, please someone
Hutch
help
News.
me.
It's the Hutch News.
Hutch Post or
Hutch,
Hutch News. I'm so
yes,
sorry.
and the Hutch News.
Okay. I was looking at their calendar versus the state fair's calendar versus the city's calendar, where none of them were exactly the same, but thinking about like, what would it be if there was a streamline of that communication, or thinking about how some of the other city entities will promote. So I think I was looking at the school board specifically, or I'm not exactly sure of the specific terminology, but the school system was using radio, they were using billboards, they were like thinking about like, how are other large entities already promoting, and how do we see that kind of streamlining? So when I talk to this third bullet here, and it's, you know, execute analysis on citywide communication platforms, I think that is really kind of assessing like, where are you today? Right, before we think about how we unite it, I think it's important to say like, how does a city currently promote events, but what other like city related entities, how are they promoting, what are they leveraging, and think about, okay, how could we create some type of cohesive communication stream? Or is it, not to create more work for people, but is it almost having like a key stakeholders team? Like, how do you make sure that everyone is connected across the city, or at least, again, those key players, to say like, hey, on the 3rd Friday of the month, we all need to update the calendars, or at least put everything in this one particular document that's a shared drive. Or I think it's increasing the communication across those entities. And then you look at how you can kind of build that out for the public. And so I think this third bullet at least kind of starts that, when you really start to analyze, what is our current method of communication? How are we amplifying small businesses? These are just questions that I was asking and thinking about, like, how, if I wanted to like learn more about this and really dig into it, these are just some of the starting points. How do we partner with the state fairgrounds to communicate events year round? Just thinking about economic stimulation there. Given our current demographic and the demographic we want, how are we communicating using outlets that make sense, right? So if we know that there's an older demographic within this area, you know, how much are we leveraging social media, or how are we leveraging technology, and or closing that gap that could potentially be there as far as some of those people that are living in Hutchinson. So just, I think there's some questions that need to be answered first around how people are receiving their news around events or around Hutchinson. And I think that that's kind of where I would start initially. Hopefully that answers your question. I think the other component to this is around the narrative. And I think conversations like this is a great start. So everyone, if we scroll up and you think about like why you stay in Hutchinson, I think we can all attest to the conversations we had. People spoke about community. I think we jokingly had some some marketing campaigns just within the cross, and I'll share those here, and you guys will realize I'm super corny, but it was like Hutchily Ever After, like come here and find your Hutchily Ever After. It was like hashtag here in Hutch, right? Like here in Hutch. And I don't remember it, but I think I said something like, you can explore the depths of the world and the heights of the galaxies, or some reference, right, to like Stratica and the fact that you guys have the Cosmosphere, right? So I just think it's about almost romanticizing the city, and like who better to do it than the people that are on this call or like reaching out into your community, so that, you know, they have the buy-in of being a part of the story creation and the narrative generation. And then that's your campaign. Those are the people that are marketing the city. It's like each of us.
Well, that's excellent. This is Deborah over at the Hutch Chamber, and actually the Market Hutch arm, which is a partnership between the city and the county and the Chamber's Visit Hutch group, is actually in the midst of a campaign. They're just on the creative side of it right now, so it hasn't rolled out. But it's attempting to do just that, because it really markets to people who are coming to either visit Hutch for retail, visit Hutch for events, and leveraging, getting them to stay here, spend here. And I guess we all know that tourists are oftentimes trying your community on for size. So I think that's definitely already underway. So that's good news.
Yes, Deborah, I think that's great. And I did get a chance, is it BauerCom, I believe?
Yes.
So I did get a chance to speak with her as well. And I think one of the key takeaways for me was almost like creating a cohesive brand for, you know, the image, like the logos that you see and the colors that you see, and kind of creating that consistently. I think the one thing I would just say also goes back to the Visit Hutch, yes, but like also the next step of like living in Hutch, and like how do we help that process, which I think speaks to maybe the second bullet, right? It's like while you're here, also here are all our home resources that are like easily accessible. So I think that's a great starting point, and Lori actually seems like she's doing a great job. So very excited to see how that goes.
What other questions do you all have for our team before we let them go?
This is Bob Ritter. I have a question. We start looking at trying to attract young couples. So many of our young couples today have very diverse professional backgrounds and professional skills. And how do we attract young couples to a town that really doesn't have that much diversity as far as employment, so that both spouses are able to find quality jobs?
So I think, Robert, I think that's a great question, first and foremost. And I think we definitely considered that within our initial kind of research, and as we were digging in with our interviews. I will say, I think that might be slightly out of scope for the research we chose to kind of go deeper into, just because we did really focus, I think, a little bit more so on the housing lens and attracting from a can I live here perspective and what that looks like. But I think it's a great question to ask, again, kind of reiterating the proximity to Wichita. I think when we were initially looking at cities, some of these larger cities within Kansas have like 10 colleges. And so maybe it's thinking about the partnership, and this is just me talking off the cuffs, of grain of salt, but thinking about the partnership with the junior college as well, and what partnerships they have with the corporations and the startups in Hutchinson. Maybe that can be a creative way to kind of lean in more around job diversification potentially. Thinking about other curriculums. I know you have some, I'd have to look at more case studies on this, but just some junior colleges have certain programs around like IT specifically and partnerships with other organizations that could kind of hire them outright. I think Startup Hutch had something similar to that. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but thinking about how you can replicate and expand on some of those partnerships, I think could be one way.
Yeah, I absolutely echo everything Taylor said. Again, it's a little out of scope. This wasn't quite the focus of our project, but it did come up in interviews. And we did have one of the quotes about the development, kind of the community, about how we definitely don't recommend that Hutch be a bedside community for Wichita. However, we do think that there is potential for Hutch to stand on its own as an economic hub while also leveraging that greater job diversity that is in Wichita. So where maybe, you know, if one half of a couple is able to find work in Wichita and the other half is able to stay in Hutch, you kind of have that balance exist a little bit better. So that is something, you know, if we had more time, we would have liked to explore more.
Yeah, I think we talked multiple times about how the fact that this is like it could be a never ending project. It's hard to put a time boundary and say we're done researching and coming up with recommendations on something as big of an adaptive challenge as this. But all we had was a semester, and the work now lies with our community. And what do we do with the information and the recommendations here? What do we already have going that we can build on? As Deborah said, there's already a market project, a market Hutch project in the works. We know that our housing organizations have great ideas and potential. So how can we kind of put these pieces together, use this data and move forward? So again, I just want to thank our team, Jordan, Rachel, and Taylor, so much for working alongside our community this semester, and you all have been a pleasure to work with. We wish you all the best as you kind of go back out into the world, or Taylor, I know coming back to MIT next year. So everybody, could you just help me give them a round of applause, virtual round of applause? So you guys are welcome to stay if you want to, but we're gonna switch gears into a community debrief and kind of processing what's next. So thank you guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure learning about Hutch.
And y'all, they didn't get to come to Hutch over spring break as sometimes USA Lab students do. So I am working on a care package to send each of them that kind of captures some of the essence of who we are. If you want to put something in there, let me know in the next couple of days and I'll ship it to them. Okay, so everybody, I can tell you're processing, which is good. I'm a processor too. As you think about what you've heard, what stands out as something that surprised you, something that challenged you, something that is the thing that's making you process right now?
I think for me, Carrie, it was hearing the numbers of how many homes are in that red zone. I mean, as they were presenting that, I'm thinking of there's at least 3 within the area of where we live in Hutch that I know. Basically about every night that I take our dog for a walk, I see those homes, and they are vacant. But to hear 150, that's a lot within our community.
Yeah, David, I think putting numbers to probably what we all know anecdotally, that housing, the state of the housing we all know is pretty bad, and that we know we all know of lots of vacant houses or houses that are even lived in that are dilapidated. But not just hearing the 150, but then with the 300 that are, you know, still moderately dilapidated, really makes it more concrete, I guess. And then seeing it on the map and, you know, how it's everywhere as well. It wasn't just in one part of Hutchinson where that's a problem.
Yeah, that spoke to me. I think that kind of took away the idea that, you know, all of the dilapidated houses are south of a certain line in the city. That, you know, that's been kind of the common thread. I will say one positive thing I noticed is that, you know, a couple of years ago, I guess probably almost 10 years ago now, the city did the 500 worst homes list. And it's good to see, you know, at least from what the students put together, that maybe we are seeing a reduction in some of those. So maybe that's a little bit of cause for some hope and some positivity. But yeah, I think it really, to me, it illustrated, I was surprised to see so many north of 11th and north of 17th. And I think that's a message that probably is a little different than what most people in the community think. So.
I was just going to say, I was intrigued by the marketing comments because that's something that has come up over and over and over. And so many of us have worked on it and done things, but then it still comes out because it's not one solution. It's all of these silos still. And how do we break down those silos and get a unified message? Because if everyone feels like they have to own the message, so where does that come from? Where does it live? How do we break that down? So that's just another conversation that keeps coming back because we haven't quite found the right technical piece of it.
On the housing data, I was also surprised there. Before this presentation, I was thinking it was mostly going to be south of 11th. So to see a lot of that, you know, pretty well dispersed throughout town, it's kind of eye-opening. I would like to see that data kind of be leveraged with both local government organizations as well as interested parties throughout the community that could maybe take advantage of that data and slowly chip away at that 150 number and continue to improve one house at a time.
Connecting to narrative, I wonder if, you know, the story we've all been telling about ourselves that, you know, 67501 or south of 17th, south of 11th is, you know, the most dilapidated or struggling part of our community, whether we haven't been looking at the data to see that that line has been moving or that it does affect more than just maybe what we would like to think it affects. So I'm curious about how the narrative plays into that perception.
I would be curious to do an overlap of the neighborhoods with those and see where each fall would, how many in each neighborhood, and if that was a way we could kind of start chipping it away and connecting with those resources.
Thinking about chipping away, but from a different perspective, from a big, bold perspective. because I got to ask these questions. If our community success was completely guaranteed, what bold steps would we choose? If we knew we were going to attract young families to live in Hutchinson, but we just had to do the things to get there, what would be the bold steps that we would choose? And I say we, I don't mean Community Foundation. Like this is a team effort. It's a community-wide effort. What bold steps might we choose if our success were completely guaranteed?
Begin renovating historical homes in the south side, as well as utilizing smaller lots that are owned by the land bank.
Yeah, I agree with Logan. I think that some low-hanging fruit would be finding developers that would take the risk on, land bank lots that can start the infill. Those don't require special assessments. They just, require somebody with the will to go in and do it and take some risk, which then starts improving, hopefully, the neighborhoods that, inspire people next door, like the example she showed. So I think that's one thing. I think, I liked her marketing recommendations of a unified message of what it means to live in Hutch. And I think we do a fairly good job of getting people to Hutchinson for a lot of reasons and lots of events. And those numbers are proving out in, our tourism numbers and our sales tax capture. And our businesses are all, having a stake in getting people to Hutch. But if people come to Hutch, and back to the point they made early on, that you can't find 3 apartments to rent, and you can't find very many homes in an affordable price point, we have to fix the product problem before we start marketing it too boldly, or we'll disappoint people when they get here that yes, we want you to live in Hutch, but we don't have a place to put you. So I think we've got to start with the development community first and foremost.
Speaking to the low-hanging fruit as well, maybe identify those dilapidated buildings that are already in our featured neighborhoods. Since we've already got momentum going there, maybe that is something that coupled with the neighborhood development groups and others, we could start working on those low-hanging fruit in those neighborhoods that are already featured.
Yeah, I guess I didn't clearly say that, but I was thinking the overlay map they were talking about. Also, I would say, I think our first instinct is always to go to the red dots when the real benefit can be made with the orange dots. If you can fix 2 orange dots, the price of 1 red dot, fix the orange dots, because the red dots aren't getting any cheaper or more expensive. It's kind of like when we did a complete survey of all of our streets. If we can put all of our money into this one really bad street, and all of these just get more expensive, or we can fix all of these streets, keep them from getting worse, and this one's the same price it would have been a year ago. I think there has to be a balance there, that we don't just focus on the worst of them, that we try to keep all those other houses from falling into that next category.
Part of our strategic thinking should be that these dilapidated houses, quote unquote, used to be desired housing. And so where would we want desired housing to be? And I think we're missing an asset of Cary Park as an opportunity also of, if we're targeting families, the opportunities of programs and community life development around Cary Park, which would at one point would have been a desired area to live in.
Laura, I think Lance is on here. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot. As 308 board members, if you can talk right now, I wonder how you're interpreting the recommendations and the findings as it relates to USD 308's particular challenge of declining enrollment, and what you see as the district's responsibility or potential role in addressing that. And then what's the responsibility of community partners?
Sorry, I stepped away. I was getting kids to do chores. They got home from school. So I missed a little bit of what you said, Carrie.
That's okay. How, as a USD 308 board member, are you processing these recommendations, since part of how we got here was from 308's declining enrollment and how that's impacting decisions? How are you processing the recommendations, and then what do you think the district's role or responsibility is in kind of addressing things going forward? And then what do you need from partners?
I don't know, that's a lot. I think, the whole presentation is a lot to take in. I think there are a lot of good things that are already being done. I wanted to touch on something that Deborah mentioned about marketing, because I think it's really important that we, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said something about we need to fix some things before we start marketing. And I was just thinking about how we can maybe be marketing to people that are already here, and how we can all get on the same page and telling a good story that we can all be proud of. I also think we need to be talking about ownership and not duplicating, reducing duplication. So, and that's just going to take somebody taking the initiative to get everybody together and figure out what we want to tackle first, and starting with some of that low-hanging fruit that we're all talking about.
So on the low-hanging fruit, whether that's the story we tell about ourselves and or those homes that might be easiest to turn around or on land bank ground, what might get in the way of moving in those directions? What challenges might there be even to the low-hanging fruit to going after those, and how we overcome?
Absentee owners being a possibility if these some of these properties are owned by folks that live without or outside of our community. That could be problematic. They may not have the incentive. Maybe I don't want to improve it. It's only going to increase my tax status and so on. So that might be a challenge.
From a building perspective, sorry, Rebecca, I would just say purely the cost of materials to put a structure up right now, that makes everything much more difficult.
I was just going to say, even those who do live in the buildings, there are quite a few that are dilapidated that you know, anyone from Interfaith can talk to about, that people live there and the cost of, they can't afford to improve their houses because they can't afford they can barely afford their taxes as it is. So, or they don't want to, they like the way it is. I mean, that's probably the minority, but there's a lot of that.
I think that was my cue to chime in. Yeah, great information, great data. One of the things that I really found to be potentially useful was every single project application that we submit to KHRC asks what the most recent housing study has been. And this data will certainly be a highlight on our applications. I actually just got off a 1-hour Kansas housing webinar ahead of this one. And there are a number of concepts and new funding opportunities that are going to be coming down the line to gap fund the new construction infill and to focus more on moderate income housing. So yeah, I think a lot of information that we've seen, that we know, and I appreciate that the group is really processing a solution today. And I would also reiterate, I believe somebody mentioned the code enforcement and the acquisition piece may be one of the major challenges to actually targeting the top, 150 or 200 properties. And like Rebecca said, it may be easier to go after some of those orange dots rather than the ones that may just need to be removed from the map.
Off the top of my head, again, just going back to those featured neighborhoods, but who would know better the homes that represented the red dots, the orange dots? Who would also have the most incentive to see those houses come back into good shape or whatever, if you happen to neighbor next to one of those houses? So during their featured meetings and things like that, maybe they could collaborate and come up with some solutions. I mean, even if it's just a yard party, just cleaning up the yard, doing things like that. Because people, as a rule, I think, take pride in ownership. Sometimes they're just afraid to ask for help. Maybe again within those neighborhoods, if they start communicating, there might be some solutions that we haven't even contemplated yet.
What did you guys at the Interfaith Housing Services do to acquire and improve that row of houses across the street from you that were, so dilapidated, but you guys were able to get those houses and put them into, livable facilities?
It was really a war of attrition. Bob, every one of those houses were acquired through different means. A couple of them were, a tax sale. One house we overpaid by probably $15,000, and then we were able to work with the city and SCED to access the CDBG. And then the final 2 houses that are just wrapping up renovations right now, that was 3 years of the city giving the owner citations and threatening jail time before we could actually get them to accept our offer. So, it really is a patient game to acquire some of these abandoned properties in this town, and you have to be tactical about it. But yeah, that's a number of different avenues to acquire, a whole block of housing, Bob.
I want to get Ryan Vitlook back in here. Ryan, when you think about the Housing Commission and the role of the city in this effort, what do you need from community partners to address some of these challenges and help make progress?
Yeah, I mean, that really, I would say, we need voices besides the Housing Commission to be advocates in our community for housing redevelopment and for, again, kind of expanding what I believe most folks think is preconceived notions of that. Because I think what we just saw today is that there's several parts of the community beyond where we traditionally thought need attention. So, I think that's going to be important to do, especially during budget season coming up. The council has talked about programming some of our ARPA funds for housing, but I think there's going to need to be a conversation of what exactly we want to see with those funds, and in terms of what can be a long-term investment versus just a one-time spend. Because the intent of this is we want to make sure that these funds are an investment in our community and not just a one and done type of thing. So, definitely getting voices besides just the Housing Commission, I think really highlights, because the Housing Commission knows that these are important and has been kind of talking for years about it. But yeah, getting other people in the community is going to be vital as well, I think.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, everybody. I do want to point to in the chat, Deborah has suggested that maybe people from this group would like to be a part of previewing the marketing campaign for Market Hutch. So I see Logan said you're interested. If that's something else you are interested in, if you let me know, then I'll make sure to pass your name and information on to Deborah. Jim, I want to go back to you. You said in the chat of we need to model the change we desire. What does that look like? Is Jim still here? Jim might have left. I think Jim left. Okay, so we'll pivot. So what's the last kind of note we need to leave this conversation on to spur action, energy, investment in the work ahead? What's the last word we need to hear?
Something that always sticks with me when I learn something new, and this has all been very, very informational to me. I learned a lot, is I always try to talk about it. And I think if each one of us could talk about it in our circles that we do influence, we can set things in motion to where when it does come up in other areas, it's not going to be something completely new. Granted, this conversation has been being had, but if we can generate more momentum in some of the other areas of the community and other circles of the community that might not be talking about it as much, it might help us when this marketing comes out, right? It might help us when we are trying to tell the story and change that narrative. That was a really long answer for you saying, what's the word?
More than one word was welcome.
I think I think there are probably a lot of people on this call like me who feels like we've been talking about this for a long time. And this is great new data and a great opportunity to continue that conversation, and just a reminder to not be tired of the work, that progress is perfection, that we're not trying to solve every problem today. And the more times we reinvest in that, the more progress we're going to make. And to what Seth was saying, we aren't going to change the narrative with the marketing campaign alone. It's It's going to take everyone jumping into those conversations that are happening, that are putting down Hutch and changing those narratives. And again, that's not something we can do alone. So if you're feeling brave and you see someone saying there's nothing to do in Hutch, start linking things. This weekend, I couldn't get to everything there was to do on Saturday. And so I think that that's progress is perfection. Like, don't be weary, we're making progress, but also don't feel like we're making enough.
Thank you. Yes, this is not a new conversation. Housing it's going to be a need that we need to address long-term in this community. Even if we figure it out, it'll come back up again. So how can we build into our processes that, again, no entity alone is going to solve this. It's not Interfaith Housing's job to renovate every house in Hutchinson. It's what's each of our kind of piece of the mess and what can we contribute. And maybe that first thing is just the story we tell and the people that we invite into being part of the progress. So thank you all. Oh, Sarah, were you going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say that to me, what came through, is two pretty specific jobs we need to be doing. Well, they had 3 suggestions, but the 2 that stand out to me as the ones that we have all been trying to work on for years is creating that shared vision. So the marketing piece and the vision for our whole community, and that can't happen with each of our organizations creating a vision and then putting that out there, because it doesn't accomplish what they're driving at, which is let's all talk the same language. And then all the housing part. And like you said, Carrie, that's about engaging, things like impact investing and contractors in town and just, all different angles of how that can work. It's not all going to fall on Interfaith, but we know they're strong partners in that work. So.
I think it's nice that we've placed names on neighborhoods. And maybe by having each neighborhood with a specific name, people will take pride in that neighborhood and help and encourage other people in that neighborhood. We don't know our neighbors, we don't know who our neighbors are and how can we help them,
Yes. Yep. So on that note, let's all be good neighbors in our own neighborhoods. Okay, we've hit 4:30, so I want to honor your time. Again, thank you all for your time, and let's keep going as a community, figure this out. We'll be in touch.